Hi, Group Life friends. Tom here. Another great passage we're looking at for this week, coming from Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 21. It is a companion passage that Pastor Dave will be speaking on Sunday, but we always realize that these passages are standalone. You can use the notes and stuff that you get from Dave, but if people are in your group that haven't been there, this passage, again, packs a punch. And you as a leader can direct them toward questions and ways that you can discuss this that will be very meaningful, I think, in people's lives. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate the work that you're doing in Group Life and how we're, as a community, we're learning and growing. We're sharing our lives together. And I trust that we're allowing the scriptures to help inform and shape how we interact with one another. This passage is an interesting one because it really speaks about a disagreement that took place between church leaders, where you have the church in Jerusalem led by Peter and James, and then the movement that Paul has developed as a mission to the Gentiles. And in this passage in Galatians, Paul brings to light this disagreement that he had specifically with Peter, or with Cephas. Cephas was would have been the Aramaic name for rock, and as you know, Jesus named Peter the rock, which means Peter. So when you see Cephas in the passage, it's really Peter, and here Peter and Paul are interacting in a place of disagreement, to the point that Paul calls Peter a hypocrite. Again, that's an interesting kind of a loaded word, and it really means someone that's in effect wearing a mask and is trying to act out something that they aren't. And so these are pretty strong words. And so it's very interesting if you choose to, you can really go along the line of how do Christians disagree, and when there are places where their points of view are different, whether they be theological or how we live out our faith, how do we function in that mode? And so that's a key theme that you can pick up from this, and that will definitely cause some very interesting and unique conversation. At the root of that issue is that Peter did not, he talked about how he was including Gentiles, but when it came down to it, his practices was he ended up excluding eating with them. And so it almost made them feel like they were like a second-class Christian. So that's something you can talk about. It's very interesting. The other part of this passage talks about the difference between faith in Christ and living out or obeying the law that was prescribed by the Jewish religion, that said that if you keep the law and you practice that as a means of worship to God, that is what made you right with God. Where Paul is saying, no, a different point of view now, that in Jesus Christ and in faith in Christ, that is what brings us into unity or in a relationship with God. So that's an interesting topic to talk about. It's how do we move from out of a works kind of righteousness, that what we do, all the good things we do make us right with God, versus what does it mean to put your faith in Christ, and that's what brings us into righteousness. But then how should we live after we place our faith in Christ? So these are some questions that I think are very pertinent and are worthy of discussion. What does it mean to follow Christ in faith, but then also wanting to live out a life of holiness and living our lives so that we are like Jesus? So I trust that you'll have some good conversation about that. One of the key verses in the whole passage comes in Galatians 2:20, where it talks about, I am crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in Christ Jesus, who loved me and gave himself for me. You could spend your whole time unpacking that verse. And one of the key questions that you want to look at, that you personally, but also you want to maybe bring to your group, is what does it mean to be crucified with Christ? and how does that play out in our own personal lives, and really how does living that way impact our relationships with people that we might disagree with or might take a different stand on an issue, and how does that play out practically in our Christian faith. So I trust that as you read this passage and read it over a few times and let it really soak in, that it will have an impact on you, and that the questions that are in the study guide and the questions that you will form will help you in your discussion, and that may we all just grow as we desire to be more and more like Jesus. God bless you, and thank you for the hard work you're doing in the lives of people through Group Life.